Live. Good
Hello, hello.
afternoon. Welcome to Hell in the Handbasket. My name is None Your Business.
Bradley, for real.
And
And
today we wanted to go a little bit off the map, shall we say, and pick a region that, not a whole lot of people talk about.
that's right. So for
And,
episode 17, we're gonna
oh, yeah,
not do what
episode
we've had to
17.
do for the last couple of episodes where we have a plan to talk about something and end up having to talk about something completely different because the news is just breaking. And you know what? The news is breaking still, but we're gonna stick to our plan this time around. We're gonna actually discuss, you know, what we had planned in advance. So
Sure.
yeah, Kursk
And I
and
mean,
all sorts of things
and
are
I
happening.
mean, what is there to say about Ukraine and Palestine and all that that hasn't been said 10 times over,
Well, except
Um,
for go back through the things that we said and say, look, see, what did we say? What were we saying? And it's like our podcast is relatively new, so we haven't been saying it for long publicly, but we have been on a DPA open mic, so I guess in a way we have. And on top of that, like just in general, like this is like these aren't like brand new opinions, right? So
yeah,
but it's really interesting to explore a region that is a little bit different and like Nanya was saying, a bit of a microcosm of
yeah,
what we're seeing in the world today.
yeah. So the title of this one that I came up with was Geopolitical Island Hopping in the South Pacific. So our region today that we're going to focus on is the South Pacific nations
Hmm.
and the geopolitical implications of their alignments, particularly with the West, primarily America, vis-a-vis China. So, as you guys can probably appreciate, historically, the South Pacific Islands was largely America's backyard, and that kind of stemmed from post World War II Reconstruction. And as you know, during World War II, America had been on a lot of those islands, and they had bases there. There's a lot of connective tissue between the various South Pacific islands in America that have kind of formulated, post World War II.
Hmm.
Now, with that said, that's kind of shifting as we see right across the world, not just in the South Pacific. You're starting to see it in other parts of Asia. You're starting to see it in Africa. You're starting to see it in South America, Latin America. Um, there's a real geopolitical shift that's been happening, particularly the last 10, 15 years, as China has been rising and the West has been on the decline. You start to see a lot of these nations looking at their own geopolitical self-interest, and China, through programs such as the Belt and Road Initiative, have really done a good job kind of reaching out and getting their, I don't want to call them tentacles because that sounds kind of nefarious, but
Yeah.
they've really been done a fantastic job in, number one, diversifying their trade partners
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
spreading their soft power, shall we say.
Well,
So,
by not just diversifying their trade partners, but also diversifying their security partnerships as
yeah,
well, which is
sure.
very interesting. I think to me that's been the most interesting thing doing a deep dive into this is to see how one by one, many of these, island nations are um, starting to side more with China. For example, they're not recognizing Taiwan, right? They're recognizing Beijing as China. They're openly like Solomon Islands, right? For example, will openly say, yeah, we have security arrangements with both sides, and why shouldn't we? And that's very smart for us to do. One thing that
Yeah.
a lot of these small nations are really concerned about is climate change. It's much bigger concern there than it is in, well, here in the States anyway, at least where I'm at. And China plays into that. The U.S. like left the Trans-Pacific, or not the Trans. When we stop talking about the Paris Climate Accords, right? They think that's a big deal. Um,
Hmm.
China's just playing into that. Excuse me. But yeah, so that's just one thing that I thought was very interesting to see.
Yeah. And I think for me, I've been following this region region for about 5, 6 years now. And I don't know why. I think from what I recall, it was actually an article that I read 5 or 6 years ago about the Solomon Islands. And the Solomon Islands was traditionally a very strong US partner. Um, and about 6 years ago, back in 2019, they were the first, I would say, of the island nations who kind of switched allegiances from, recognizing Taiwan versus recognizing China and the one China policy. So, what happened after that declaration at the time, that was a big geopolitical kind of mess that the US, I don't think, really saw coming. So, and they were the first domino really to fall, to your point. And what then happened, to give you guys a very truncated history of it, basically the government of the day, they switched their kind of official stance to the one China policy, recognizing China as and Taiwan as being, whatever they say, a part of China proper.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, what then happened was the Americans didn't take too kindly to that, and through their various government agencies such as U.S. Aid, they effectively started organizing riots and protests.
Hmm.
We've seen this
Color
all across
revolution
the globe,
style.
color revolution style, to create discontent within the country, and it worked. So there was riots, and nobody was really sure why they were rioting. It's like, why would anybody in the Solomon Islands care about recognition of Taiwan? Like, it's not an everyday thing. So right
Well,
off the bat, you knew.
I think before Taiwan was, you know, what was a big partner for them in terms of trade and in terms of other things. Like Taiwan made sure to have a foot in, but it's just that with the
Sure,
multipolar world, the increasingly multipolar world, with the rise of China, with the maybe it's going to be a tripolar world. I don't know. We'll see, right? How it ends up.
but
These
I think
countries are
with
finding themselves in a position like many other countries where they can diversify. Like Turkey was able to diversify a long time ago, right? They were able to. India, just due to their sheer size and their importance and the history, they were diversified a long time ago as well, right? They never gave up on their Soviet technology and all this other stuff. Um, but where does Belarus? They're right there. They have a chance to play Russia off against whatever. But like these tiny little island nations, what were they going to do?
yeah,
Now they're in a
yeah,
position that they weren't in before. This is just geopolitics playing out.
sure. And I think with a lot of these island nations too, keep in mind that a lot of their funding does come directly through the U.S. government. Like, the U.S. government funds a lot of these governments, budgets, either directly or indirectly through things like, US aid and various other, government evildoers, I'll call them. So basically, what then happened after those riots kind of quelled down, China ended up signing a security deal with China, or China and Solomon Islands ended up signing a security deal. They wanted more help with policing to help quell the riots and things like that. So it was a bit of a diplomatic row at the time that was the first domino to fall, really. And then since that all happened, Solomon Islands and China have been building their trade relations. And keep in mind, all these island nations, they subsist on really two things. Number one, fishing. Number two, tourism. Other than that, they don't have a whole lot, but we'll get into that later on when I start talking about the economic zones, because that's another big reason why um, the South Pacific is becoming more and more, I'll call it, important. And maybe I can just dig into that right now. If I share my screen here. Do. Yeah, here we go. Let me know if you can see this.
Yep.
Yep. Okay, so basically, another reason why the South Pacific is becoming more and more important are because of what's known as uh, I think they're called economic exclusive economic zones, EEZs. Now, basically, what that means is, every country has got a certain mile limit around their coasts and stuff where, they have the exclusive rights to it. So when you look at a map like this, it'll kind of lay out all the economic zones. Now, when you think about these zones, historically, they were largely around the fishery, right? And who can fish in those waters, which fishing is very important. Everybody needs to
Yeah.
eat fish. But lately, one of the more important reasons for these economic zones is what's under the ground. So we're talking oil, we're talking minerals, things that used to be more difficult to mine and extract are becoming either more necessary because there's fewer of it, or it's becoming more economical. So, with that said, all of a sudden, these economic zones become much more important. So, I'll use a country like Kiribati, for example. Kiribati, most people have never heard about it because it's a little tiny island nation. However, if you look at this map, and I know it's not very blurry and stuff, it's got a huge EEZ zone because it's so spread out. So it's got the largest economic zone in the world. So that in and of itself makes
Hmm.
it very strategically important. So I just wanted to set the table and describe why these island nations are becoming more and more important. Yes, it's because it's becoming important geopolitically because the Chinas and the USs of the world need bases, they need ports and things like that in order to move militaries as well as their goods around. But I think it's also becoming much more important because of the resources on these islands or around these islands. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course.
All right.
And well, not
So,
just that, but go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
oh no, I just go ahead. I was just want to kind of lay the table there, just straight up of why these little tiny quote banana republics are becoming more and more uh,
And they're so important
valuable,
for
shall we say?
China. And one of the reasons they're
Mhm.
so extremely important for China, right, is because of the fact that that's their paranoia about the potential, for an economic blockade. I think that they've always been um, concerned with that. That it's something that they've, China is diversifying too. From the Belt and Road Initiative to making sure that they have inroads on these tiny little islands to expand their sphere of influence, and you know, a lot of them really don't mind. Yeah, there's political parties that choose one side or the other side. This seems to happen a lot. It seems to be a theme, but overall, in general, uh, the general trend seems to be towards this increased diversification. And yeah, you're going to give the Americans some of what they want because you don't want to be too reliant on China, but you don't want to be too reliant on Australia either. And China's a perfect opportunity for them to handle both of those at the same time. You might be, I
Yeah, I
can't
think
hear you.
so.
Oh, go
You know,
ahead.
I definitely agree. Oh no, I agree with you. I think exactly what you just said is kind of what's happening is they're looking to diversify as well. Like China's looking to diversify as well as the islands themselves are looking to diversify because they see where their bread is buttered. And we'll get to that later on as we talk about some of these specific islands themselves. Uh,
Hmm.
but maybe I want to kind of present to you right now how I've kind of broken these groups out, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
Bear with me here. I called them the camps. Oops, not that. There we go. So these are kind of the South Pacific nations. South Pacific is what I used to call it. I think there's another term for it now, Oceania, that popped up in the last 10 years. I don't know what that's all about. So I'll just call it South Pacific. And I've kind of broken them out into three camps: your West leaning nations, your China leaning nations, and then kind of nations that are more or less balanced or neutral. And the yellow highlights on those three, though there are, I think it's 13 nations that still recognize Taiwan. And as you can see, three of them are in the South Pacific. And you say to yourself, well, why do these nations care about Taiwan and stuff like that? It's all geopolitical. So these are nations that, like I said, get a good chunk of their budgets from the United States, and hence they pretty much will vote with the United States any way the states wants, right? And we see that in all
Yeah.
these UN things. So
On anything that
that's what the yellow
is
highlights.
important that we deem worth putting the pressure on them for,
Yeah,
they're liable for that.
yeah, I agree. So with this in mind, I kind of see Papua New Guinea, Fiji, and I apologize if I mispronounce some of these names too. I think it's Palau, Marshall Islands, Federated State of Micronesia. That's one camp. Then, as we just mentioned, Solomon Islands, Kiribati, and Vanuatu. How do you pronounce Vanuatu? Vanuatu? Um, Vanuatu. Okay, sorry, Vanuatu people, if anybody's listening, I'm totally butchering your name. And then the neutrals are Samoa, Tanya, Tuvalu, and Nauru. So my thought is we can kind of start drilling into some of these countries and look at some articles and some research that we dug up specifically on some of them. So, I'd like to start off, I guess. Let me start off with, I guess, Fiji, because I think Fiji is a good example. Or sorry, no, let's start off with Palau, because I think that as well as the Marshall Islands. These are two good examples of like really pro West nations and don't have a whole lot good to say about China. And like I said, they know where their bread is buttered, and in this case, they know where their budget is coming from. So they pretty much vote the way they're told to vote, right? However, let me use Palau as an example. So if you were to do any sort of research on Palau, you'll find articles like this where some elected official, in this case the president, is talking about vessels in their vessels in their waters. You'll hear lots about vessels coming in and illegally fishing, all that kind of stuff. Um, so they're clearly, I don't know if they're anti-China, but they're definitely pro-West. Let's just put it that way. But for every article that you'll find like this, you'll also find lots of articles like this one. Why hasn't tourism recovered in Palau? Now, a country like this, as I said, they basically have two industries, fishing and tourism. Palau, over half of their tourism came from people from China. Now, after the COVID thing and the pandemic, their tourism industry has never really recovered. Like pre-pandemic, they were getting 90,000 to 100,000 tourists every year, and like I said, the majority of them were coming from China. And then last year they had something like 10,000. So their tourism industry has collapsed. Now, you'll read a lot of articles, though, they blame the Chinese for the collapse. They blame the Chinese that they're not coming there anymore. And you'll find all sorts of articles about the Chinese government is actively, trying to boycott tourism on the island and stuff like that. I couldn't find any real hard evidence to suggest that they were, but I think that Palau's issues are twofold. Number one, I don't think any country has really recovered from the pandemic yet when it comes to tourism. And then secondly, yeah, I don't have any doubt that Chinese people are hesitant to travel there because why would they? As I just showed you on the previous one, they don't recognize Taiwan as part of the one China principle. So,
Mhm.
I think that there could be some Chinese kind of indirect influence, let's say, where people are just kind of programmed not to travel there, and we do the same thing here. So I don't think that that's anything nefarious. It's just either you agree with this policy or you don't, and if you don't, why would we do business with you, right? So
Soft
they're in
power.
really hard shape right now because like I said, their tourism industry has collapsed and doesn't seem like it's going to come back, not anytime soon. And when you look at the Marshall Islands, it's very similar to Palau. Like their economy seems to be in the dumper, and they don't have any ways to get out of it really. So I suspect that in the coming years, you're probably going to see these two guys, Palau and the Marshall Islands. They're going to go by way of these other guys at some point. I think it's inevitable. And I think if you were to look at Micronesia, and then let me just pop over to Micronesia real quick. Micronesia is an interesting case. This guy he's all over the map. He was their outgoing president, but it seems to me like they'll trade their allegiance for anybody who will pay him enough. So they early last year, it appeared like they were building better relations with China. And the president actually went to China on an official state visit. They rolled out the red carpet, all of that stuff. And then several months later, they're saying, "Hey, Taiwan, if you pay us 50 million bucks, we could change our allegiance back." Right. So these guys are pretty shameless, actually. Like it's all right there in black and white. They're like, "Yeah, we'll pay us
No,
50 million and we'll trade our vote."
they're just embracing the multipolarity. That's all.
I guess so. Um, so that's
So is
Micronesia.
everybody. See, they're just being more open about it. It's like Donald Trump. It's not like uh, we weren't trying to get, let's say, for example, oil rich regions in Syria, to pressure the Assad government, but it's that he came out there and he said it, we got the oil. So it's just a matter of some countries are in a position to, I think, express more the multipolarity. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the hold is going back and forth, and like we were discussing, political parties will pick a side, and they'll swing the country one way or the other. And we've seen this, like it was in 2022 that the Solomon Islands signed their um, security pact with China. So I mean, like this is an ongoing kind of Cold War. um, and it's interesting because it's an ongoing Cold War between, well, should I say the U.S. or China, or should I say the West? Because I feel like we could say the U.S. and then we could say Australia is kind of like our Israel in the region.
Yeah,
Australia,
I
New Zealand.
mean, honestly, Australia and New Zealand have more skin in the game than in a lot of ways US does.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would kind of lump the three of them together. Yeah, for sure. The US and its um, vassals down there. You know. So moving on to the bigger islands there in the quote pro camp, here's the interesting thing you're seeing. So I'll use Fiji as an example. You'll see lots of articles like that, like
No, I've seen this
lots of
lady before.
articles. Yeah, there's lots of articles about Fiji and China and the Belt and Road Initiative
Hmm.
and all the good work that's going on there. So one thing that jumped out at me with Fiji was like they've got quite a number of projects going on, and you know, by all accounts, they seem to be quite happy with whatever arrangements and whatever agreements they're making with the Chinese. And you'll see that repeated over and over and over again in a lot of these articles. You'll hear the same thing. The Chinese are doing stuff. Like we see tangible benefits in the stuff that the Chinese are doing.
Well, and
Whereas,
what they're doing is useful, like infrastructure and economy type stuff, and the aforementioned climate change paranoia. What is
mhm.
us? What was it? Australia made a deal with uh, who was it? They made a deal with one of these. It might have been like Micronesia, um, where they were going to like, oh well, to help address these climate concerns. This was their approach. We're just going to allow the import of like 280 of your citizens into Australia a year. And that was like one of their like ways of addressing that. Like meanwhile, okay, what about everybody else that gets to stay behind instead of the 0.001% that gets to go to a different place? And China's addressing those things more. And you could be like say, oh well, they're being cynical about it or whatever. But I think so are these nations. I think they're being very calculating about it, and they're saying, yeah, we're going to take what we can get from each side. So
Well, and
just
to your point on that, I think that let me just got too many things open here now.
yeah.
Bear with me. Where is it? Come on. Oh, it's because I've got too many things loaded. Here we go. You're seeing lots of articles like this too. And that's to your point. I think these island nations are fed up with lip service. They're fed up with lack of, promises and a lack of investment.
Lack of
So we've been,
progress, just the
yeah,
words and words.
like we're at what, COP 30 now? And what's actually been done? So I remember back when this whole thing started back in the 90s, and the idea was going to be that the rich nations were going to give these poor nations all sorts of money to invest in their economies and to weatherproof their economies and all this nonsense,
Hmm.
right? None of that's ever happened, right? None of that's ever happened. So I think a lot of these island nations are like, okay, either we start seeing some change, we start seeing some money flow, or we're just going to go to China and where we can actually see tangible benefits. So I think that it's
Or
kind of a
just
perfect
not even that.
storm.
Like you get to play one side off against each other. Yeah, I'm sure you don't want to be overly reliant on China either. Um, it's the diversification. Like what you say, okay, these nations are pro China, and maybe there's more of they have a more China slant. They've started to approach the change their policies in such a way, whatever. But I'm sure that somebody else that's going to come into power is going to love to be have to be bribed by the Australians or the Americans all over again or the British. I'm sure they wouldn't mind that at all. And there's all kinds of pressure that we could put on people, and color revolution style if we have to. So I mean, yeah, it's probably harder to do that once there's a defense pact with China of some kind. But that's why this is a struggle. That's why this is like just an interesting branch of the Cold War. Like it's the other parts of the Cold War are more like going on into a simmer, but this part of the Cold War is still very cold. It still feels like people moving around their chess pieces and jockeying for position.
Mhm. Well, and I just wanted to show this too, because it's not just that China is going around and investing in infrastructure like ports or whatever. They're doing all that, make no mistake, but they're also increasing their soft power quite a bit. And this is a good example of it. So last year, there was a huge, huge landslide in Papua New Guinea, and like all sorts of people died, right? I remember when it happened. And I also remember the absolute lack of response to it. and you had like 2,000 people buried, and it didn't seem like there was any sort of real aid flowing there. And but one, Australia sent a little bit. I do remember that, uh, and I think New Zealand did. U.S. aid sent like $500,000. Like, what do you do with $500,000?
Yeah,
And
that's
so
that's
that
insulting. That's an insult. That's
yeah.
like a
So meanwhile, though, same response. China sent not only aid, they sent rescue teams, they sent medical teams, and it was a pretty good soft power win for them. I thought, in the wake of all this tragedy, I think that it showed that the Chinese were trying to do more than just the economic stuff, and I think we should expect to see more of that coming from China, and not necessarily a bad thing, but I think China is ramping up in not just their economic game, but also their soft power game. So I just wanted to highlight that as well.
okay.
So that's pretty much the West leaning nations, shall we say.
Mhm.
And if we move on to
Or maybe
the China,
the chess pieces that are currently more leaning towards the West, opposed to China
yeah,
currently.
and then we talked about on the more China leading nations, the Solomon Islands. That was kind of the real first one that I recall. And
Hmm.
then since then, as I mentioned, Kiribati, they also recognized the One China principle in 2019.
Okay.
And as I said, they've got that huge economic zone in around their area, which makes them very valuable, not just for fishing, but also which China consumes a lot, but also for the minerals and oil and gas and all that good stuff that um, you know may be underneath the ocean or could be. Like I've never seen any surveys, but the general feel is that there's a lot of stuff under there that's yet to be tapped because nobody's ever put any money into
Yeah.
this stuff, right?
Yeah.
So,
That's what they always say, and it seems like it makes sense. So
yeah, and then the last country that we kind of looped in there was the one I can't pronounce, Van, yeah, Vanuatu. Now, Vanu, Vanuatu, Vanuatu. Sorry, folks.
sorry, guys.
Vanuatu, yeah, they're increasingly aligned with China. They've accepted, significant infrastructure investments and development aid from China, and now it still maintains ties with Australia and New Zealand. But its economic reliance on China has grown quite substantially, as most countries in the world have, by the way. I mean, China is the major trading partner of a lot of different countries in the world now,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, yeah, of course. Maybe I wonder if it's the majority of countries have China as their major trading partner, and
I
I'm
believe
gonna take a
so.
look. So
Yeah, I believe so. I think I read somewhere that China is the major trading partner for some ridiculous number, like 140 trading countries or something like that in the world.
yeah, it's
Um,
crazy.
yeah, it's a
The
pretty
major,
big number.
that's the one that they're the major one. I'm sure they're a huge part of most everybody else's.
Yeah, so countries like Vanuatu, for example, you're seeing them. They they still have, like I said, they recognize the One China principle. Um, they still have relations with the Australias of the world, but Australia is kind of like also put the brakes on some of their funding because of the decisions they made.
Mhm.
So ultimately, all that's going to do is push them further into the China camp, I think. You know,
Well, yeah, you can't. You lose the ability to pressure people and just play dirty once people have options, that
Yeah.
like that having options already by itself means the like that is the multipolar world. That is the end of hegemony, because if you can choose, that means everybody has to play nicer with you. The Americans do too. Americans have to show you the carrot, not just the stick, because
Yeah.
the Chinese are giving you excellent carrots, carrots upon carrots.
Well, like I said, every time you hear from one of these, leaders of these nations, they're all pretty consistent in what they say. Like they all come back to when you're dealing with China, they say things like they're dependable, right? And that's a big thing. Like if you're an island nation and a good chunk of your budget is dependent on aid, for example, you need dependability. And it strikes me that America's really dropped the ball on being dependable. And largely they've forgotten about this region for decades. And now they're playing catch up because China has been like China's never shut down their embassies. America shut down their embassies to a lot of these countries 30 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
if they had them at all, because they just weren't deemed relevant enough to keep an embassy in and staff it and fund it and all that. So they just we don't need an embassy here because we've already got them in their back pocket anyway. What's the point? And what they're finding now is, well, it's really hard to do diplomacy if you don't have an embassy. So America's actually starting to spin up embassies in some of these places, but I just fear it'll be too late, because who China's been playing the long game for the last 30 years, whereas the
Yeah,
West is just catching
that's
up.
the thing. Yeah,
So
it's so funny to see this play out, where it's just the old adage of the Chinese being. I think even Sergei Lavrov said something about this recently. He was like, "Oh, China, I don't even have to talk about them. We know that they're patient. We know that they're eternally patient. They always take the long view. Um,
sure.
so they kind of live up to that reputation, and it's not been like that. Sit on the bank and watch your enemy's corpse float by. Uh, Kind of manner of victory, right? Because they've had to do a lot of work, and there's been missteps along the way, but slowly they are they're achieving the results, and their long view is bringing those results. Because if the businesses that are trying to aid in, let's say for example, any one of those nations, right? Uh,
Mhm.
if they're going to be losing money, right? They don't want to have anything to do with it, and we've seen that already, where because uh, was it banks that were being shut down because they were losing money? I think it might have been banks, but I think again it might have been the Solomon Islands, where it was either banks or businesses, Western businesses were moving out because it was less profitable. The profits are going down. But he's like, the guy that I was watching say in the interview was saying, but this is where we live. This is where we have to deal with these unique challenges that come with our region, that come with being part of this whole you know living here. So I don't know. It's 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 crazy to see how that has come back to bite us in the butt so many times on so many things in this last, you know from Jake Sullivan coming out there and saying we've screwed up our supply lines, to the war in Ukraine, showing that we can't make ATACMS rockets, and we depend on that. That's going to be our game plan for fighting with China. To now, this, where it's like, hey man, all of these short term this like focus on, you know, financial quarter, whatever it is that they focus on. This has this has serious repercussions, and I think maybe this is we've heard whisperings about this, about, well, we got to take a little bit of a look at China's model, where they have a little bit of uh, well, what is it, capital communism with Chinese characteristics, whatever they call it. But Ambassador Chad Freeman says everybody else calls it capitalism. Well, whatever, maybe that's cope, I don't know. but we're trying to take a look at that too, and we obviously have to, because this was no way to build a defense industry, as we can see. This short term
Yep.
approach was no way to build a defense industry. It was no way to build diplomacy. The United States stopped doing diplomacy. Look at this. We stopped doing
Yeah.
diplomacy. China has one of the best diplomats uh, alive today, Wang Yi, right? And what do we have? We had Blinken up until recently. Like that was our
Well,
top diplomat.
in fairness to Blinken, though, I think this predates him. Like, this is a problem that's been decades in the making.
Yeah, but
It
Blinken
comes.
is just a symptom. They kept this. He was not the. He was like the latest good example because it's the latest administration. But like you said, it's been go. This has been building up. That's kind of my point. Is that China has been taking the long view this whole time. They have been doing things that are maybe less profit. Maybe China doesn't give two shits about climate change, right? But they know that Micronesia does, and Fiji, right? And they're going to play that up.
Sure.
So it's just it's
Well,
very it's, it's a
and
very
the
Chinese
the
approach.
other thing, the other thing that they do quite well, like, regardless if you're big or small, they tend to treat you with a similar type of respect, I found. So in just reading through a bunch of research and articles, I came across all sorts of various state visits to China with some of these leaders. Like I said, even the guy who doesn't agree with them, the Micronesia guy, like, they rolled out the red carpet for him, you
Mm-hmm.
know? So I think when they go to China, they're treated with a lot more respect than they would be if they were to go see Joe Biden, as an example. So, and William Ruto, the president of Kenya, he said the same thing in a pretty famous clip. He said basically, they check it out, just Google like William Ruto school children, and he talks about it's actually kind of funny because he talks about an instance where the all the African leaders of the African Union, all 50 of them or whatever it was, they were all rounded up on a school bus, and they were kind of shipped off to go meet. I think it was one of the president or something.
Okay.
And his basic gist of it was like why are 50 of us going to see one of you? Shouldn't it be the other way around? And he said, furthermore, we were all put on a school bus like children. And the way
But
he
it was
described
also
it is,
insulting. They were insulted as well.
yeah, very insulting, right? And when I look at the Chinese approach to diplomacy, it's much more respectful, regardless who you are, right? I think that, if you're a big nation, a small nation, there's a certain level of respect, provided your name is not von der Leyen. But but other
Yeah,
than
but
that,
who is she? She's not even
right,
she's what who she doesn't represent a country, right? So I think this
right,
is China just making a point, and then I think that even that just displaying patience and the long game, and just having the guts to say the European Union. What country is that?
yeah.
You're a diplomat of what? Okay, leave. Just having the balls to do that already shows a lot, and it shows kind of their steadfast approach. Honestly, kind of a scary thought. Kind of like certain MMA fighters, for example, or boxers. They just have like a stone face. The facial expression never changes. It's like actually kind of something really intimidating about that. Where it's like, no, we're still doing our thing. So China going out there and just continuing to do their diplomacy game, even with the
Mhm.
missteps. It's pretty scary. I think that's very intimidating to observe.
Yeah, and they're getting the results, right? And here's a perfect example, just to move on to our next country, and it's my favorite country to pronounce. And if I'm saying it wrong, I don't care, because as far as I'm concerned, it's called Tuvalu. So Tuvalu, this tells you everything you need to know. Let me just start off with this one first, actually. So pro Taiwan leader, he got kicked to the curb last year, and so he was the guy getting paid off. And as you can see, just a couple weeks later, it's inevitable that we're going, and Tuvalu is one of these countries that currently still does recognize Taiwan.
Yeah.
But even they're saying, like, the writing's on the wall. Eventually, we're going to get to where we need to be. I expect it'll be sooner than later that they're going to drop the whole Taiwan thing and switch over to the China camp because economically it just makes sense, right? So this is a perfect example of one of these neutral countries that's about to kind of
It's
move
funny that
off
it's
of
a
the
new
neutral fence.
country. Like, look at the flag. It's like
Mm.
it doesn't look like a neutral. It doesn't look like it should be a neutral country at all. It's got the freaking UK flag right on there. It's
Sorry, what are you
hardly.
looking at there?
Just oh, sorry. I'm just discussing their flag in general.
Oh, okay. Okay, sorry.
Like you
I
can
thought you were
Google it.
looking at the
They have
flag.
literally part of their flag is the UK flag. So it's interesting. And UK for some reason thinks that they have a lot of influence in that region to throw around.
Oh, I can't imagine how. Yeah, I don't see how they would be. I can see where Australia would have clout. I can see where New Zealand would have clout. I don't see where the UK would have clout
Yeah.
in this day and age. You know, it's like
Is it
why?
at what point in time can we call the UK Chihuahua State? Is this happened yet? Actually, probably not as long as they have nukes. As long as they have nukes, they're at least at least uh what would they be? At
I
least
think
a medium-sized angry cat. You know, like medium-sized
I think
angry cat.
we're at the stage where we can definitely call them a Chihuahua state. Actually, I was reading an article
Because
just
I think
last
they're
night about
lions, right? So they're not a lion anymore. They're more like a domestic feral cat. You know,
oh,
you could
they're
still cause a nuclear explosion somewhere and then send you to the hospital because it scratched you or whatever. And now you have like cat poop virus in your brain. It could cause a lot of nasty things. Like screw that little shit. But you know, it's it's not the lion that they maybe once
I think the
pretended that
UK
they were.
is, yeah, I think they're more or less done. And everybody who lives there recognizes that. Uh, and even the government there is starting to realize it. Like I said, I was reading an article, I think it was just last night. And basically, the gist of this report that came out from some government, whatever, over in the UK was that the standard of living there has dropped so dramatically in the last 10 years that
Just the last decade.
yeah, and basically the gist of the article was, or the report or whatever it was the standard of living has dropped to the point where there are parts of England, like around like Yorkshire and areas outside, like in the north east, there
Mhm.
are certain regions that this is the what the report said. There are regions in certain areas of England right now that are worse off standard of living economically than the poorest parts of Slovenia.
Oh, it
And
sounds like
that
America.
well, that was the comparison, and basically the article was kind of like horrified that, oh my God, we're worse off than these Slovenians. Like, what are they? You know,
Well,
was the kind of undertone of the article. It's like we can't even be better than the Slovenians. They're backward Slavs. Like, you know, whatever it is that the undertone was. But it
I
doesn't
mean,
make
why?
the outcome any less real. Like, yeah, no, there are people in the UK who are really hurting, really hurting. And it's really sad, man, because like as somebody who's been there, I've traveled there quite a bit, and I kind of see the decline every time I go back there, you know, and it gets a little like it just gets a little bit more desperate, you know.
Really,
So
you visited the UK over a period of time, and so you can kind of come back and see the decline a little
yeah,
bit.
yeah, I've been
Really,
going there pretty regularly for like 30 years, and you can definitely see it. You can definitely see it, right? Maybe not in like Knightsbridge or somewhere like Kensington, somewhere like that in London. But yeah, once you get out into the suburbs or anything outside of London, yeah, it gets pretty bad pretty quickly.
I've seen some of the
And
videos, I've seen those videos that go viral about like, dude with the knife broke into my apartment, all that stuff. Um, yeah, I mean, it does really look like they're really kind of screwed. And I don't understand everything that went down with their immigration policy. I think maybe the babies, British people aren't having babies. Maybe I don't know. Like, maybe they needed some. They wanted these people for the British Army, for the Royal Armed Forces or something. I don't know what their game plan was long term, but we can see that
well,
it's
it's the globalist game
it
plan.
massively
Yeah.
decreased the well. What about the politicians on the ground though? Like, what about like what are they getting at? Like, in America, we could kind of see well, Elon Musk said that recently. Well, maybe it was like a month ago now. There was a tweet where he talked about um, why are the Democrats bringing in all of these illegal immigrants? Because they want their votes. They're going to try to find a way to finagle that. So like there's at least something that is an incentive structure that is set up for people on lower down scale to be pushing for those policies. I don't know. I don't know if I'm making sense.
No, you're making sense. At the end of the day, I don't know how we got on the topic of the UK, but bottom line, I don't think they
Well,
have
it's because
any influence on the South.
they think they have this outsized influence in these little island nations, and you can even see it like in Tuvalu. The like
Tuvalu.
the literally the flag is yeah, we're gonna call it Tuvalu. I like that.
But that's just colonial nonsense, right?
From
Like they were a
Tuvalu to
former colony.
Timbuktu, it rhymes better that way.
But I
Um,
mean, they were a former colony, but it's easy to change a flag, right? Like I don't
okay,
think they have any real influence
well
in the
that just
South
shows
Pacific.
you the where we were and where we're at now. Because these guys were British colonies, and they were like basically pseudo Western colonies in a lot of ways, and now they're diversifying. It's kind of like uh, when the slaves revolt against the masters or whatever. The masters say, "Oh, I thought you guys loved us." No, yeah, sure, people are nice, but you know what? Slaves like rise up and kill their masters, and you shouldn't feel betrayed about that because that's just the human will, wanting to be free. That's the same thing here. People are going to. What did you think that they really loved to have you tell them how they can set up their infrastructure and what their policies should be, or what? People have egos too. So
Well, and it also comes down to, when you become more desperate and it gets down to nut cutting time, you don't have time for stuff like this, right? Common theme across all countries. We were
mhm.
promised stuff. We're not getting it. It- like I said, now we're at nut cutting time. And I think the pandemic probably accelerated a lot of these problems too, because, like I said, the economic activity just hasn't come back to these places. So not only are they're just getting more, like I said, desperate economically. So if you're not getting your bread buttered from where you think it's going to be buttered, you end up going to here. This is Samoa, by the way. So again, perfect example. See how respectful she is. Like, this is the president of the biggest country in the world, and he makes time for, the Samoan prime minister, right? And as you can see, they're prioritizing working together. Doesn't matter how big or small, right? This is what China is doing really well. They are doing diplomacy exceptionally well right now. And this is another example. This is Samoa. So Samoa is another one of these neutral camps. Give it a couple years, and they will be fully in the Chinese camp too, I would imagine. Right. And think about that. Like, there's a lot of connective tissue with Samoa and the US, right? So when we talk
Yeah,
about, being I don't want to say anti-US, because they're not anti. When you talk about going against the old colonial masters and side of things, that's kind of a big deal for some of these nations, right?
Mhm.
So, but picture tells you everything you need to know. Like it's all right there. Like, they're actually sitting down, they're making things happen, they're signing deals, and what's the West giving them? Platitudes and tropes about values. You know, people don't have time for values anymore. People want to see action. And there's some Moa in 2 slides right there. So, but look at how what's the word I'm looking for? Diplomatic, I guess. This picture looks right, and
Yeah.
that's what they do well. She wouldn't get a meeting with Biden. No way. The only way she'd get a meeting with Biden is, like I said, along with 50 other people.
It's not fair to put Biden there because Biden was uh, had scrambled
Okay,
eggs for
she wouldn't
brains.
get a meeting with Trump.
Yeah, I don't see. It's not fair to put Trump in there either because Trump has a massive ego and he wants to be seen with winners, not these
I
like
can go back
mainstream island
to,
nations.
I can go back to George the first Bush if you like, or Reagan. Like,
I feel
we
like
can go
Clinton
far
would have
back.
done it. Clinton would have done it.
I don't think he did though. That's the thing, right?
Well, he would have
Like
done it
he's
now. I see
well,
him. See it in his. Okay, definitely Bush Senior. Probably the last really competent president that we had that people say, right? I wasn't alive back then, right? But looking at the policies, uh, definitely, and then maybe Clinton. I think I could see it happening. Trying to make deals, trying to make some freaking, um, you know,
yeah,
he wouldn't. He'd never pull out of the TPP. Are you kidding me?
yeah. We'll see. Yeah, we'll see. So, moving right along to what do I want to show you next? I think I showed you the Tuvalu stuff. You know, Tonga. If you look at Tonga, same thing. Like they're moving into the US or the Chinese camp as well, because similar to Samoa, they just economically they need to, and also it makes sense because China's their largest trading partner. And
Yeah,
then I think we covered Tuvalu. The last couple that I wanted to talk about was Nauru. So let me just open this
I guess it's
link.
Nauru. Nauru. This kind of sounds like Naboo.
I just have too many things open. Nauru. Bear with me here. There we go. Come on. Share screen. So this is another this is another domino that fell. So they ditched Taiwan last year as well. So the U.S. decrying whatever that means, and more of the same,
I
right?
mean,
All the U.S. tends to do is warn. They warn everybody about China's nefariousness,
well, I think it
and
used to work better. I
but
think they
when you
used to.
actually well, it worked better because the bullying was more effective. But like I said, people don't have time for bullying anymore. They don't have time for, they don't have time for values. They don't have time for bullying. All they have time for is what can you do for our nation that's going to benefit us? And if you can't do
Yeah.
anything that's going to benefit us, we
Well,
don't want to talk to you. We're not going to
they
listen to
don't
your
have
bullying. We're
time.
not going to listen to your values.
I want to say
Yeah.
they don't have time for maybe your ideological proclivities by and large. They have their own ideas about how their culture should be built. Thank you very much. But maybe they have, but in terms of not bowing to pressure, it's not time. It's the opportunity not to have to do it anymore. I think that's what it really is. That's what it boils down to. It boils down to, um, what did you think we really liked being your servants? And maybe there's a little bit of sometimes that happens. Sometimes there's maybe some Stockholm syndrome, like Hong Kong. A lot of people in Hong Kong really identify a lot with the UK or whatever, but doesn't seem like that's taken off to such a great degree in a lot of these island nations, at least the ones that I've been reading about. I have not read about every single one that you posted, but
Well, another example, right? So Nauru, they switched allegiances. Why? Again, China puts word into action. It's the same message across countries. China does what they said that they're going to do. They're dependable. Those are the messages that are coming from these countries. Whereas on the American side, all they get is tropes about don't trust the evil Chinese, but they don't explain why you shouldn't trust the evil Chinese. And they throw out, oh, it's a debt
well,
trap. Okay.
yeah, yeah. That's why. Yeah, don't fear the evil Chinese, but I mean, it's this thing. That's what I'm. That's the kind of the long view, the large view, the larger picture that I'm getting is that people are just happy to diversify. They're happy to use the Chinese, and they're happy to make use uh, of the Americans as well. It's why not? They have the opportunity to do that. That's really, I think, the bigger. And like that's why you're not going to have the opportunity to keep doing this crap. You're not going to have the opportunity to just constantly do nothing but use the stick. You're going to have to come up with some carrots. And maybe that's part of what this whole restructuring is about with with Donald Trump and defunding USAID and National Down for Democracy. That could be part of it.
Could be, or it could just be, hey, we're getting out of this world domination game. And
No way, no way. Not they like the business opportunities that are presented by maintaining hegemony. I think that's really what it kind of all is about, to a large extent. Like we've discussed Mike Benz multiple times, and that he calls it the donor drafter class, where you have the government do the hard work of breaking into a country and opening up the markets for these companies, and then these guys can come in and they can draft behind and you know how take their advantage, whatever it is. But with China playing the longer game, even if you're trying to take the advantage, it's even if you can make a deal with the devil and know what you're doing, and make the calculation that I'm going to take this from here and I'm going to take this from that. So this whole thing where we're fear mongering, we're scaremongering, maybe that works on our internal audiences. Maybe that works for the propagandized Western mind. But I think it less and less impacts that reality, that spinning, that weaving of reality, less and less impacts those nations.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I go back to people want to see action, right? And they're going to go right now where they can find the action because, like, I don't think any economy really recovered from the pandemic, and I think that there's a lot of people hurting. And we use the example of Palau with their tourism, right? And how much their tourism industry is completely cratered,
It
right?
hasn't recovered,
And just hasn't recovered. So for them, and they're blaming, the evil Chinese government for banning, tour groups and whatever. I don't believe that any of that's probably true, but definitely I think that there's people in China who just don't want to travel there for sure because for whatever geopolitical reasons they
Yeah.
have, right? and
Mm-hmm.
and that's their right. So I think that these island nations are going to come on board eventually because they'll have to, right? China's in their backyard, America's not, right? So
Yeah, it's only
um,
natural that
yeah,
they're
I
going
think
to
so.
fall into China's gravity eventually. Like, I mean, that's kind of probably why we wanted them to fall into, Australia's orbit more. But, Australia doesn't have the same kind of leverage, even though they do make constant deals and they're a big player, maybe major player in the Cold War in the Pacific, Uh,
Well, and the other thing about these countries too is a lot of them they actually have surpluses with China, right? It's not like they're running huge trade deficits or anything. Like, China's there for a reason. We want your fishery. We want, whatever it is you sell because you happen to sell it. And so, it's beneficial for them to work with China as well, right?
How much you want
So,
to bet that's more long game thinking?
yeah.
They're trying to like really set it up the economy in such a way where they're happy to take your fish and happy to take whatever raw exports you have. Yeah, make surpluses. We'll trade at a
So
deficit.
the
We'll owe you money.
next one I want to touch on is the Cook Islands. Just show you this one really quickly because this is a fairly recent one, just came up last month. But the Islands, as I understand it, it's got some sort of free association agreement with New Zealand, whereby it's effectively runs itself independently, though it has an association with New Zealand for things like passports, for example.
Okay.
So the Cook Islanders have New Zealand passports, as an example. Now, Cook Islands has been looking to be more independent in recent years, as I understand it. I recall they tried to launch their own passports at some point, but that kind of angered, well, the residents, I don't think really wanted it. And I don't think New Zealand wanted it either. But then last month, they signed a partnership agreement with China that really angered the folks in New Zealand because I think it was an agreement where they weren't really kept in the loop and they weren't part of the agreement. And it doesn't seem like there's anything really nefarious with the agreement. It's an agreement to look at things like fishing and trade rights, minerals on the seafloor. And I think it was some sort of security agreement whereby they would, help train police and crap like that, right?
Yeah, I
So
think security agreement. Any way you can get your foot in, security agreements.
exactly. I think that this was a way for China to kind of get their foot in the door with Cook Islands and start building a relationship with them. So New Zealand government, they seem to lose their mind over this because they weren't consulted. And, Cook Islands Prime Minister Mark Brown, he, on the one hand, from what I recall, he said, yeah, we'll keep the New Zealanders in the loop. But on the other hand, he kind of said, well, we're independent. Long story short, there's kind of a bit of a row going on between the Cook Islands and the New Zealanders over this agreement with China. So time will tell what comes of it. But it's again another example of one of these island nations moving towards China. And this is a fairly recent one, just happened last month.
It's diversifying. You keep saying moving towards China. I'm gonna keep saying diversifying. They're diversifying their political investment, their political uh, leverage.
Mhm.
So you don't, you know, that would be
Well,
foolish not to do. It would be foolish not to do as long as you have these big players like two stomping elephants, that trample the grass. As long as the two stomping elephants are offering you nice things, yeah, take it from everyone you can. And so like it's just diversification. And this is my prediction. We're going to see further diversification. I think
mhm.
countries that maybe are too close to China are going to be happy to all of a sudden have a new security arrangement with Australia, or New Zealand or something. Maybe the Brits could get their foot in the door finally, and be like, hell, we're important again.
Yeah. Well, not only are they diversifying for trade, here's an example. This is not a nation. This is New Caledonia, but you may recall this
Yeah.
happened last year around this time.
Mm-hmm.
There was a big bunch of protests in New Caledonia, which is a French colony, French overseas territory. And from what I recall, long story short, was there's like a pro independence movement going on in New Caledonia. There was a lot of upset because the French government tried to change some of the election laws there that would have allowed, French, like French citizens from being able to vote or something in the elections. And the idea was you're trying to water down the vote uh, for pro-French voters at the expense of the native New Caledonians who live there. So yeah, there was lots of violence going on. People died. The French had to call in their military to New Caledonia to quell it down. Uh, I don't think it's the last we've heard of it, but just to throw it out here, this is part of a bigger regional shift in the South Pacific. As we talked about just now, people are diversifying. I think a lot of these colonies, to your point, where we were talking about, was it Micronesia with the British flag? Yeah, a lot of these former colonies are probably going to potentially look to claim independence if they haven't already. And I think New Caledonia is a perfect example of one that will eventually, look to go independent from France.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder how that would look. Wonder what they're going to be able to do. I mean, maybe with France being so cowed in Africa, they'll have more resources and bandwidth to spend on Caledonia and maybe other areas in the world where they maintain some kind of military influence. But uh, or maybe that's exactly the opposite. Maybe they're just going to continue to shrink, and France is just going to continue to be screwed. They're going to maybe. I mean, what are the Europeans doing now? Focusing on Ukraine, right? Including the French.
Well, France has got real problems because all their former colonies are kicking them to the curb. Like, forget about New Caledonia. That's the least of their worries. They should really be focused on Africa
Yeah,
and all the stuff that's going
cut
on
the
there.
losses, cut
They're
Africa,
getting
focus on New Caledonia.
yeah, they're getting kicked out of so many places in Africa right now. And I just think it's a sign of the times, right? But
Maybe. I mean,
yeah,
I really wonder if maybe like the Americans, were also doing some cheeky breaky in there,
maybe.
like
But
being
I
like, hey,
mean,
we want to wrestle some of this influence. What are they using? The franc? No, they're using the dollar or the
oh,
African
who?
franc or whatever. France
Oh,
free
down in Africa, they use the
currency.
CFA.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of them
The,
still use the CFA.
exactly. Go into there. Be like, these are now our little proto colonies, or maybe.
But I think the CFA is pretty much on its last legs as well. Um,
Well, like,
I
yeah,
don't I
France
don't
is
think
on
the
this
CFA,
last leg. So is the CFA. Like,
yeah.
it's the same example. Of course, these African nations want to get away from under the CFA and these like awful trade practices. Of course they do. What, you're surprised to hear that?
Yeah. So that's the map, folks, and that's about all I've got to say. I think it's gonna, like I said, it's an interesting space to look at because you kind of see how everything's shifting, and it's all really shifted in the last 10 years, I'll say. Like a lot of places in the world, but it was interesting. It's interesting to read about some of these little tiny nations that you honestly don't think a whole lot about. And but then when you start digging into their geopolitical influence and
Mm-hmm.
importance in
And the
some of these places.
tug of war going on, then you can
Yeah.
see that. But see, okay, you're saying this is a microcosm, but I'm seeing this as a maybe a more China focused part of the new Cold War strategy. Maybe it was kind of a bellwether for a while, but now look what's going on in Europe. The Russians are not playing this Cold War thing anymore. They're like saying we're done. You guys are so full of crap. We are literally winning on the battlefield. We are taking back whatever our
Mhm.
sovereignty and diplomatic promises that were made and that by force of arms.
Right.
Meanwhile,
And I think
what's going on in the kind of the South Pacific region there, you have, China has been playing a much longer game. Like, it seems like it's been, a much longer game, and it's been a much slower boil. And even still right now, it's at a relatively slow boil. Like, they don't want to get out of control. Um, even with the recent, maybe some people could say provocative or escalatory measures with the Chinese circling, with their battleships circling around, was it Australia, New Zealand? I forgot. With the Chinese like huge buildup of navy assets and air assets and stuff like this, you could maybe see that as a threat, but that's still Cold War territory. They're not; those jets aren't bombing anybody. So
Yeah.
it's still different. It's still a little bit. It's got a different, distinct, more Chinese feel. More long play kind of.
Yeah.
And you can see that they're not. See, the thing is, the Russians, maybe they have a little bit of like Ukrainians are our brothers. The Belarusians are our brothers. Other Russians in other regions that are maybe less Slavic, they are our brothers too. Maybe Russians want to make little brothers out of everybody. I've heard this said before. China is not doing that at all, and these countries really appreciate that. They don't feel like, oh well, you you're what are you concerned for my well-being? You're meeting me where I'm at. I
Well,
care
and
about climate change. I care about the rising ocean. I care about these whatever, right? And they're
well,
coming
and
right
this,
there.
yeah, and this goes back to what I was saying. People don't have time for a lecture on values anymore. People don't have time for a discussion around, how they're going to, change their privatization laws so corporations can come in and steal everything. They don't have time for that anymore. Like basically it's like, okay, we're here. This is what we sell. This is what we do well. If you'd like to trade with us, come to the table with something tangible. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why in every bit of research for all these countries, everything comes back to the same themes with China. Dependability. We know that things are going to get done and they do what they
We
say.
want to do
And
business with them.
yeah, and here in the West, we've completely ignored them to our peril, and now, once we've realized the geopolitical importance of some of these places, frankly, it's too late. It's just too late. Um,
Exactly. This what
you know,
we haven't been playing that long game.
yeah,
China's always seen this as their region.
yeah,
And
and
they're go ahead.
and I also think that the countries that we have in place who were supposed to be playing that role, Australia and New Zealand, um, I think their effectiveness has probably been suspect at best. Like good some areas maybe and probably bad in others. Now, is that necessarily their fault or a part of a bigger funding question? I don't know, but what I can tell you is
I
everything
think
that I've
Australia's
researched
been
about this, well, everything I've researched is just we've been neglected for decades and we're sick of being told that the check is in the mail. We're sick of being told that our values have to change. We're sick of being told that our governance needs to change or whatever it is.
and
We're
we're
just sick
still
of
doing
being
it. That's
lectured.
the thing. You just brought up
Yeah.
Australia. They have the Australia makes security agreements with these nations, and they impose like their um, stringent requirements and stringent qualifications about what kind of infrastructure projects they're going to be building. Like, who
Right.
wants that?
Right.
Nobody
Whereas
wants.
China's just like, hey, we want to build a port and these
And
are
you
the
want to
economic
build
benefits.
roads. We want to build port. You want to build roads. Go and make a deal here. Maybe we can
Yeah.
build one of your roads to our
Yeah.
port or whatever. And these people are just taking advantage of what is on offer. It's what's on offer. It's the free market.
Yep. Alrighty, sir. Should we move on over to the two scoops?
Let us do the two scoops. It's been
All
a
right.
relatively smooth stream. My experiment with alternative streaming software definitely failed this time around, but I'm going to have to. I think I see what I did wrong.
All right. So this was the one we wanted to watch. Yeah, I couldn't
Name three
download it.
countries besides the US.
Can you hear this, by the way?
I can hear this. Yes,
You can?
yes, I can. But you should play the next one after this. This is the one that I like the most.
Wait, aren't countries in? No, wait, yeah, wait.
Do you know what year the U.S. was founded?
That I don't know.
Take a guess. What year?
1965?
Yes. Do you know how many continents there are?
No, I'm stupid.
Take a guess. Yeah.
No, I'm stupid.
No, you know this. Take a number.
50?
Do you know who the first president of the USA was?
George Floyd. I mean, his name is George, though. I just don't know the last
Washington.
name.
See,
how many inches are in 2 feet?
I give him a pass. Just a break.
I don't know.
Around how many inches?
This
You
one's
have to guess.
5.
Yes.
5
I was
inches
a
in 2
seventh
feet.
grade civics teacher, government teacher, and she is an elementary school teacher.
What year did we get our independence?
Oh my God.
Something. We're teachers.
I actually don't teach what's in our curriculum. I'm teaching children social studies that's not in our curriculum, teaching them things about how to be an anti-racist. I taught them about protesting. I taught them about Black Lives Matter. I taught them about Black Lives Matter.
I wonder where this is. I mean, maybe California.
That's brutal. Okay, let's do one more since we have it here.
Yeah, not the one with the kid. The one with the last one.
I don't have that one.
The very
I
last.
just got the one with the kid.
Okay, whatever. Let's do that one.
Yeah, we have to just come check, make sure everything's okay.
Okay, well, this one.
What'd you do? Did you call the police?
Yeah.
Why?
I told my mommy to go to jail. I didn't get ice cream.
So is that why you're upset?
Yeah. That's why I didn't get no ice cream.
Oh, look at the little one. It's so hard to yell at them.
Police, yeah.
So no calling 911 unless it's a real emergency, okay?
What do you call for?
I ate his ice cream.
You ate his ice cream?
Mommy has to go to jail.
Should we take her to jail for eating your ice cream?
You have
Yes.
I agree.
I would let you arrest me.
I agree. Now should I go get you new ice cream? You put this like this. Click. Go. Push.
They're arresting mommy.
All right. Put the other one on her.
I have never been in handcuffs before.
It's so adorable.
Yeah, you
Okay.
call us when you need us.
When you need
Yes.
us, you give us a call. We'll be right here. Okay, sir?
Oh,
Okay.
let's not take mom to jail next time, okay? Okay.
No, I'm not explaining this to my granddad. See you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, this second one was less crazy. This second one was heartwarming. There's like two
The
scoops
joy
of crazy.
parenthood.
Yeah, 2 scoops of crazy and 1 scoop of wholesome. 2 scoops of crazy, 1 scoop of wholesome.
All right,
But-
well, everybody, hopefully you enjoyed the chat today. And as I kind of have this saying, you know, the old saying, as GM goes, so does the country. So for the last several years, I've always been saying, as the Solomon Islands go, so too goes the world. So I guess we'll see how that goes. Like, I think as we kind of evolve over the next 10,
we're
15
already there,
years,
man. I think we're
yeah,
already
I think
there.
so too. So hopefully people took something away from this. It was fun to research anyway. So
Yeah.
have a great one, and we'll check you next time.
Peace. See you guys.
Peace out. Cheers.